Minus 300. Euclid has published a book on mathematics. He lived in Alexandria. His book called The Elements has been the great reference book for all those who wanted to study mathematics for more than 2,000 years. However, the thoughts he collected in the book often existed, but he did add a lot of evidence to it. Minus 200. Hannibal was born in Carthage, a city in the north of Tunisia with a large empire that also included the Spanish coasts. It was an empire of traders around the Mediterranean Sea. Characteristic of all these seafarers is that they used the same script. That was a script based on letters. This empire felt the pressure of Rome. Between them lay the islands of Sardinia and Sicily. Those islands were seized by Rome, and then there was pressure in Carthage to take on Rome. They've sent generals like Hannibal several times. It was in Italy when it was almost 200 BC. But he didn't destroy Rome. He left for Carthage because it was attacked at the time. Cato ended all his speeches in the Senate with the saying that he believed Carthage should be destroyed. In 146 BC, the Romans literally razed Carthage to the ground and sold the population as slaves. From then on, everything that was from Carthage became just a Roman province. From now on, Rome could grow unthreatened to finally say that the Mediterranean was their sea. But Western Europe, there were no Romans yet. That would come later. Minus 60. Julius became consul of northern Italy and Provence in 60 BC. Then he went from politician to general. He went to fight in France against the Helvetii from Switzerland. 3 years later he conquered Belgium, then Normandy, and then to the Rhine. Of the 12 million Gauls, he chopped up 1 million. When he returned to Rome, he wanted to be celebrated as a victor and elected. But he was stabbed in the wheels with a lot of sticks, and then he decided to stage a coup d'etat and declare an empire. 5 years later, someone stabbed him to death. His name was Caesar. Minus 43. Marcus was a Roman senator at the time of Julius Caesar's murder. He opposed the power of an emperor and wanted power to remain in the Senate. But his resistance to the new emperor has failed. After that, Marcus translated a lot of Greek literature into Latin, and so he contributed to the spread of Greek culture. In the end, Marcus was arrested and killed in 43 BC. To the soldier who came to kill him, Marcus said, "There's nothing good about what you're doing to me, but if you do, do it right." His name was Cicero. 0. Jesus was born. There are many stories about his life, which we know from texts attributed to the disciples of Jesus. Those stories were written down during the centuries after his birth. Jesus felt that God created man and woman, and therefore a man should leave his parents to commit to his wife. That's how husband and wife become one. What God has connected must not separate a man. Jesus said, "Don't collect treasures on earth, because that's where the moth crawls in and the worm, and that's where thieves come to steal them. You have to collect your treasures in heaven, they're safe there." The Old Testament already existed when Jesus was born and was already being studied. In the centuries after Jesus' death, the New Testament was written. 160. Ptolemy lived in Egypt in Alexandria and wrote a book about planets and stars called the Mathematical Order. It is clear that mathematics was seen in the universe at that time, and it is probably that one has come to infinity. But this math isn't coming about now. It was an age-old wisdom. For more than 1,000 years, Ptolemy's theorem that the Earth is located in the center of the universe would endure. He himself was not so convinced of his theorem, claiming that he only wanted to make mathematical predictions about the orbits that planets describe. 260. Plotinus makes a distinction. The eternal supreme good escapes all contradictions, it is perfect at rest, and we will never understand any of it. But this supreme radiates, and thus different spheres of being arise. The spirit is the sphere closest to the supreme. Matter is the farthest away from the supreme. In between is the sphere of his own souls. There is a distinction between the world soul and the individual soul. Plotinus was born in Egypt. He arrived in Rome around the year 245. Until his death 25 years later, he taught a lot. The Emperor of Rome was in his favor. It is very interesting to see that almost 2,000 years later we still talk about the soul of things. Well, it is here that its origin can be found. 313. Constantine was emperor of the Roman Empire in Rome. He felt that it should be done with prosecuting Christians. From 313 onwards, prosecutions were stopped and confiscated goods were returned. The capital of the empire was moved to a city that would later be called Constantinople. From 321, Sunday became a rest day throughout the Roman Empire. Christianity even became a state religion. Infinite and eternal. The Persian Empire, thanks to the message of good behavior, grew around 500 BC. Wisdom was to rule, not the power of rulers with armies with bronze weapons. The step was therefore not great to make it God. And many near the Persian Gulf switched from polytheism to monotheism. The Hebrew people took that step around 500 BC. Before that they believed in many gods, but from then on they became monotheists and Judaism arose. The Old Testament chronicles were written around the year 400 BC, mentioning the wise King Solomon, the youngest son of David, the king of Israel. One day, 2 women came to his court to tell him they were mothers of a baby. Solomon asked to bring a sharp sword. He then ordered the baby to be cut into 2 equal pieces and given half to each woman. One of the 2 women suddenly said that she didn't have to anymore, because it wasn't her baby after all. Then Solomon ruled that she was the baby's mother. Wisdom is part of a philosophical worldview about how everything came about and what are the forces that determine what will happen and what. It even goes so far as to influence how people think they should live together. The Zoroastrianism of the Persians was also at its core that there was something infinite and eternal that caused our existence here on earth. They called it Ahura Mazda. The success was all the greater because one ascribes goodness and wisdom to this power. The whole point is that people have to act nicely. Everything has to be in harmony. Nature, too. That must be the norm of human thought and doing. Wisdom is the way to act right, and the result of wisdom will be that everything in our existence will proceed in harmony and justice. The Persian Empire grew ever larger and larger, and around 500 BC the Persian Empire extended to the Greek islands. I couldn't beat the Greeks militarily. In Greece, philosophers, which translated as friends of wisdom, did get to know the Zoroastrian vision of the universe. More and more, Zoroastrianism took hold of the way of thinking in the Greek regions. Pythagoras and Parmenides followed this way of thinking. But in Greece there were also people who disagreed with this new view of the universe. Heraclitus reflects their vision of existence. None of his writings have been preserved at all. It is indirectly that he is credited with this book that you cannot bathe twice in the same stream. Existence as evolution is afar from eternal wisdom and goodness, but it is very much in line with the lives of Greek shipping magnates, traders, bankers, and shipbuilders. The ups and downs of economic opportunities and the uncertainty of the weather at sea are a good fit for not encountering the same thing twice in life. The golden age of Athens followed under Pericles and the Parthenon was built. But once again, a Greek is attacking the Zoroastrian vision of the universe and human existence. Democritus totally opposes the new Zoroastrian theory. He claims the exact opposite. According to Democritus, atoms would exist. Its meaning is indivisible. So you can no longer cut an apple into infinitely small pieces. Everything around us would be atoms. Not as we know it now, but from the same particles that would then hang more tightly or loosely together to form soil, water, or air respectively. That's how Democritus saw the world. This was a clear Greek counter-reaction to the Zoroastrianism of the Persians. But Plato found these thoughts of Democritus so unbearable that he dreamed that all service writings would be destroyed. Plato and Pythagoras acquired their knowledge from the Persians. Zoroastrianism, in which wisdom is central, has had a huge influence. A sad Plato wanted a world where there would be no more injustice, such as the condemnation of his teacher Socrates. That's why he decided to proclaim that there were two worlds. The ordinary material world that we perceive here on earth during our lives, and also the eternal, infinite, intangible world of thought. I think Plato's philosophy prefect depicts the Zoroastrianism with a universe that included the world here on earth on the one hand and an infinite, eternal, intangible world on the other, called Ahura Mazda. Plato's perfect thoughts that are eternal. The goodness, the perfection, the theory. We attribute this to Plato, but it's older and I think it's from the Persians. And Plato's best disciple, Aristotle, added that everything on earth was intended to evolve into those perfect eternal thoughts. Aristotle learned this vision of existence to the son of a king. This son would later conquer the entire Persian Empire. His name was Alexander the Great. After that, Aristotle founded the first school on earth in Athens. Against the Greeks, the Persians lost the war, but they did leave a huge mark on the philosophy of the Greeks. But then there is the question of preserving writings. Libraries were built, but in conquests they were often destroyed. Alexander the Great lost many of the texts on Zoroastrianism in Persian Persepolis. Alexander did have a new library built in Alexandria and the writings of Greek philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle were kept there. Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great and he conquered large areas east of Greece, and brought the Hellenistic, Greek, culture there. But in fact, people everywhere thought like the Persians with their Zoroastrianism. Hellenistic culture itself inspired Zoroastrianism, so it was nothing new that Alexander brought. However, he brought it in a way that was enjoyed by the people. The Greeks may have provided us with the school and the books on how people can live democratically and sweetly together, but putting it into practice is another matter. Moreover, the democracy of Athens is older than Plato and Aristotle also had Greek opponents such as Heraclitus, Democritus, and finally Epicurus. Perhaps these philosophers leaned more on the way of thinking of democracy that existed among the citizens of Athens. When you consider that Democritus was against the prevailing vision, he wrote that he thought everything would consist of indivisible particles called atoms. When you consider that Plato found this thought disgusting, then it makes sense that in an infinite and eternal universe of Zoroastrianism and Plato's world of ideas, there really is no place for people like Democritus who dare to think that the world would consist of indivisible matter. Just as the universe was infinitely large, you also had to be able to cut an apple infinitely into smaller and smaller pieces. But Plato, Aristotle, and Alexander the Great had an advantage. Their vision was prefected by the Zoroastrianism of the Persian Empire, and they have succeeded in establishing Hellenistic culture throughout the East. But it wasn't democratic. Even anything but. It was a technocracy that emerged. For businessmen there was no longer a place in Athens or the Hellenist Empire. These people withdrew and this is perfectly explained by the philosophy of Epicurus. However, the strength of these Greeks must not be underestimated. It was Greek generals who helped Alexander the Great to his victories. But Plato was anything but favorable to the private property rights of business families. Even though the Hellenistic Empire has produced architecture as a form of culture, it has not become a long-term way of living together, because it was soon overshadowed by a new empire that emerged. In Rome, a republic was formed. That was, in fact, Athens' democracy. There was a parliament, but they added some kind of executive power,